We have with us Werno Gevers, Regional Director at Mimecast Middle East. We're going to discuss the threat security landscape in the region, email security, some of the most persistent threats today, as well as Mimecast's latest research findings. Welcome, Werno.
Thank you very much, Anita. Thank you very much for having me.
Uh, Werno, Mimecast's latest research has revealed the impact of cyber threats on digital transformation in the Middle East. Tell us more about the findings.
Yes, so we conducted this survey across 400 IT individuals across the UAE and Saudi. So specifically focusing on IT decision makers. And we did the survey to understand three things. Really the impact the threat, the digital transformation had on the threat environment, how decision makers are responding to this, and then of course how third parties or how do they work with third parties to combat these threats. And what is quite interesting to see is that we know that digital transformation has really increased the attack surface, which, of course, changed companies' security postures as well. Because if you think of the old world where we might have been in on-premise or in a hybrid world, we had our own risk and security postures. When we move into a new digital world, we're taking on these new big collaboration platforms like Office 365 or Google, and we're taking on a completely new risk profile. And what we've seen is that there's a direct relationship between adoption and risk. And a good example of this would be if you think of the early days of the pandemic, when we adopted Zoom working from home, we very quickly saw a whole new list of vulnerabilities that came out on Zoom specifically. Even after the meetings got password protected, you still would have received these, phishing links to join meetings or random people joining your meetings as well. So that's what we've seen in terms of the relations between adoption and risk. But also the research found that more than 2/3 of organizations in the region had to postpone a digital transformation initiative due to cybersecurity concerns, with more than 65% reporting that they've cancelled such an initiative outright. So it just goes to show that, organizations are still taking this very seriously, and they are taking the fact that they have to bake their security into their digital transformation journey rather than bolt it on afterwards, which is really, really positive to see as well. What we also found is that organizations face constantly evolving threat profiles. So the threats are changing. More than 40% reported an increase in cross-site scripting, and we've also seen more than 40% seeing an increase in typical phishing attacks and insider threats as well. Biggest challenge for IT decision makers to combat this is the lack of capacity, so resources, as well as budget. So what IT decision makers typically do to overcome these challenges is that they lean on their last line of defense as one, so cyber awareness training. They also look at best of breed vendors that can support them with this. And then automation is another key role. I think as part of the survey, we found that automation is expected to free up close to 41 hours per month at an entry-level specialist and up to 39 hours at a CISO level, which is creating valuable capacity for IT teams to work on more high-value activities across the business.
Absolutely. Now, how important is cybersecurity among business leaders and decision makers today?
Well, I think cybersecurity is, it's always been important, but I think, and we've seen it in some of Gartner's research as well, that it's becoming more and more prevalent at a board level. More than 80% of companies at a board level, in their top 5 priorities, cybersecurity would be one of them. But, it's always been really important. I think the pandemic has just sort of accelerated the whole process, and it's fast-tracked everything. And we're seeing a lot more importance on cybersecurity. We know that the pandemic has stretched companies' networks, accelerated their digital transformation growth, and exposed them to the growing volume of increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. We've also seen a sharp increase in things like ransomware attacks, and the rise of ransomware as a service is putting businesses under immense pressure. So with that, we fall victim to ransomware attacks, and of course, organizations experience significant downtime, revenue loss, or reputational damage. I also think that now that organizations or now that security leaders understand that cybersecurity can play an integral part in the disruption or the success of any organization, more and more companies also have employees working remotely. They're using their company assets to, access things like online shopping, etc. So they're exposing new risks to the organization. And I think your IT decision makers and CISOs and CIOs are playing a more and more important role to create awareness at a board level and making sure that organizations understand the impact of these attacks on the organization and what the long-term effect could be on the reputation and the brand of any organization.
Absolutely. Now, how prepared would you say are organizations in the region to deal with the most persistent threats today?
Well, encouragingly, organizations are implementing cyber resilience strategies to improve their security posture and to protect against these type of attacks. Our latest State of Email Security report found that all the respondents in the UAE have some form of cyber resiliency plan in place or planning to do so, where Saudi Arabia has shown a 98%, which is really, really encouraging to see. That's very positive. We also see governments are turning their focus to cybersecurity with new measures being implemented to protect citizens and critical infrastructure from attack, which organizations are seeing as a positive development. And then in the UAE, more than 40% of organizations expect improvement in their overall level of cybersecurity, and more than a third expect a lower risk of cybersecurity attacks impacting their business. And that's thanks to the new government mandates that we've seen. In Saudi, specifically, more than 35% of organizations expect improvement in their overall level of cybersecurity, which is also really, really positive.
Absolutely. Now, coming to email security, can you give us an overview of the pattern of email-based threats in the region?
Yes, I think globally there's quite a pattern. I think the evolution of email and threats within email is quite interesting. I think in the early 2000s, we just dealt with spam, and then after that we just saw some in the sort of 2010 mark, we saw some phishing emails coming out, so dangerous links embedded into documents or emails itself. And then it evolved into things like business email compromise, where we've seen somebody impersonating somebody within the organization. That has evolved into supply chain attacks down the line. So all of a sudden, your suppliers and customers are at risk at the same time. And then this has gone beyond your perimeter as well. This has gone all the way to your brand. You need to protect your brand in the outside world, and your customers and suppliers expect you to protect them against things like fake websites where somebody's impersonating a specific website or a brand. So I think it's a multifaceted approach in order to obviously combat this. But I think if we just look at email specifically and within the realms of some of the research we've done, we've seen that more than 90% of the companies that we've surveyed seen an increase in phishing attacks, with the majority reporting these that are recurring more frequently. So I think what had happened is, with the shift to working from home, more and more organizations are relying on these collaboration tools. Our work surfaces really comprise of email and things like Slack, Teams, Zoom, etc. So there's a wealth of data and information residing within these platforms. Hence, it's such an attractive target for attackers today. And I think also according to the survey, most companies are bracing for an email-based attack that could cause considerable harm. More than 8 out of 10 said that they will experience some sort of an email-borne attack that would have significant impact on the organization as well. And then, according to our latest State of Email Security report, more than 2/3 of companies reported an increase in email-based threats as well. So we've done multiple surveys where this data has revealed itself, and it clearly shows that email is definitely something that should be taken very seriously, given that 94% of attacks start with email.
Right. That was going to be my next question. As in, are organizations taking email security as seriously as they should?
For sure. I think it's almost become a little bit of a commodity today. You have to protect against sort of spam and your standard phishing type of emails. But the thing, though, is that these things are becoming more and more sophisticated. Now, if you think of the reality of the situation, you have hundreds and thousands of organizations sitting in one single platform, right? So all the focus or the target is one place, where in the past, the organizations were either in a hybrid or on-premise. The focus was, I had to try and figure out as an attacker what the risk posture or the security posture of a specific company looked like. Whereas to now, I just focus on the Office 365 security landscape or Google security landscape in order to sort of pick those locks to try and get into those organizations, which of course, puts an enormous amount of focus in one place when you think of the amount of people and data that resides within these platforms. So I think, and I've mentioned this earlier, email security should have a multifaceted approach. In most cases, organizations are taking it fairly seriously when it comes to the basics of your spam, phishing, impersonation of business email compromise, and then dangerous type of attachments, so malware or ransomware embedded into attachments, which is known as sandboxing technology to prevent that. For us today, that, like I said, it's become a little bit of a commodity. What's more important is that, you should have protection across the board. And when I say multifaceted, you shouldn't look at just the basic threats. You should also look to inside the organization. So how do you protect, traffic moving from east to west? And how do you also use this data to train and educate your employees? I click on links every day. I visit websites. That's really important data points that you can use in order to train your employees and also measure and track their behavior when you do things like cyber awareness training. But that plays another critical part. So that's another a layer that you need to bed in there. And then beyond your perimeter as well, things like DMARC. You need to protect your domains that you own. And you also need to protect your brand with domains you don't own. Anyone can register a new domain that looks like yours and host your website anywhere else. And once again, the consumer is going to hold that brand liable if they do get compromised. And at the end of the day, it's reputational damage to your brand. So I do believe that, organizations are taking it seriously. It's just the multifaceted approach or the defense in depth approach rather, and making sure that you have DR as well. So, you've built a cyber resilience strategy around your email environment, seeing that it's one of your critical applications that organizations rely on every single day.
Right, absolutely. Now, finally, Werno, what are your thoughts on the emerging threat security landscape in the region?
Well, when we talk sort of, emerging threats, I think the same thing applies. The threats are just becoming more and more sophisticated. So, organizations need to get better at doing things like their awareness training. I mean, vast majority of our research shows that, more than 80% of organizations are doing some form of training. The biggest challenge is that more than 60% are not doing it frequently. And when I say frequently, at least once a month or once every 2 months at least. So the problem is sort of out of sight, out of mind from an employee's point of view. Or when they do the training, it's a 2 or 3 hour exercise. So they get very quickly, disinterested in what they're doing. If you're asking somebody in HR to sit through a 2-hour security presentation, it's not what they do, it's not their interest. So, we found that you focus on things like short, punchy modules that you can use to educate your employees, use humor to get them to pay attention. And that way, it's enjoyable, first of all. And secondly, you can properly measure the real risk from, an individual level all the way to a company level. And then some of the other, sort of emerging threats around security as well, as things like when somebody does click a link on a mobile device or on, working from home environment, so they're using the company assets and they do click on a link there, are they protected every single time they click on those links? We've seen delayed exploits coming into play. So The link is safe today. It gets delivered, and in a week's time or 3 weeks' time, the website is compromised, and you always have employees that will access this information at a later stage. So is the company protected at the time of the click? Because phishing is one of the key ways to do things like harvesting credentials, getting access, and then of course, the attacks will evolve from there. Importantly, organizations need to think, how do I protect my employees, my data, and my communication? Because it's at the intersection of these three things where a lot of the attacks are taking place.
Absolutely. So it's clear that attacks are becoming more and more complicated and complex. And while there's awareness, the need for frequent trainings and awareness, the frequency of the awareness campaigns should increase if we are to hope for better security and a more comprehensive, foolproof, attack-proof scenario.
Yeah.
Werner, that was a very insightful interview. It was really comprehensive, and thank you for all the insights. Thank you very much, Werner, for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Nisa. Thank you for having me again, and have a good day.
Pleasure, Werner.